It's good to be here. I am going to tell you right up front, I apologize. I'm a little less prepared than I'd like to be, than I normally am. But that's good. There's a good feeling sometimes in it being a little ungrounded, the possibilities that can happen, you know? So I'm not scared, but just letting you know. So, thanks everybody for doing your meditation. I didn't get a chance to hear the last two nights' talks. I had other things happening, but just to recap, I've been thinking a lot about what I talked about on Tuesday, which was courage and this idea that in every moment that we make a choice to sit down and meditate rather than Netflix or whatever maybe self-centered or self-directed activity we could do other than meditation. That there's courage in those moments, and that it's worth reminding ourselves of that. It's worth thinking about that and thinking about it that way, because when those decisions come up, when particularly it's really wonderful if we're just sitting around the house. It's not our normal meditation time, and we think, oh, I could go sit right now, you know, and then you do it. Like that's a really great thing. And any time that we can break that cycle of doing things just for ourselves, is that slows the momentum of attachment a little bit, and that's the purpose of all dharma, is to reduce our attachment, because as the Buddha said, that's the cause of our suffering. So any little thing we can do like that is helpful, and it is courageous, and I think it's okay to call it that, even though we may think of great heroes fighting dragons and stuff for courage. Like in our own lives, like sometimes the courage comes down to like going and sitting on the cushion when we wouldn't normally do it. And then even within the context of our meditation, when we this microcosm of that in our meditation is when we have our attention placed on the breath, and a thought starts to seduce us away from our applying the technique, and we may not notice it immediately, but we do notice it. Sometimes those thoughts are things that we might want to get up and take care of, even, and I'm sure we've probably all done it at some point. I certainly have, but any of those times that we can not follow that thought away and instead gently bring our attention back to the breath, that's the same brand of courage, and that kind of courage to undo this attachment is what is the basis of these big forms of courage, like the things that, these heroic things we think about, like those. I think it's probably pretty rare that people can just pull courage out of a hat, like you have to do something to develop that, and this is part of what we're training in when we do even just simple shamatha meditation. So it's helped me a lot thinking about that in the last couple of days, about how remembering like what we're doing, and I think that's also relates to the idea of bodhisattvas, these, they're heroes, and we are training in kind of the same thing. So we've been starting each time with some a short instruction in shamatha. So I'll do that now. I know you're all pretty familiar, but we'll just go through a brief overview, and we'll probably do maybe 3 or 4 sits in the course of the talk. Um, so if you're in a comfortable place, that's good. The physical posture is the first aspect we talk about. There's a 7-point thing we could go through, but just in general, make sure your seat is grounded, whether if you're sitting on a chair, that you don't lean against the back, but keep your own back straight. Maybe sit on the edge of the chair and keep your own back straight. If you're sitting on a cushion, legs crossed. For most of us, it's going to be one in front of the other, or some form of crossed legs. If you can do the lotus posture or vajra posture, that's always the best. But I think it's pretty rare that any of us can get anywhere near that, if not hold it for minutes or hours on end. So again, this one is really cool. I hadn't tried that until late in my meditation career, and it's actually, to me, feels like the most stable position, rather than like the normal sort of cross that you would do in preschool. like that type. So the idea with both the physical and the mental posture is to keep some balance, um, and that's related maybe to today's topic of equanimity too. So the balance we're trying to strike in the physical posture is not kind of being lazy with our body, but also not being too tight. So we keep we have a solid base in our seat, and then we keep our back straight, keep a natural curve in the lower back. One of the easiest ways to get everything in order is to sort of imagine you're being lifted from the top of your head here, and that brings everything into place and also brings your chin in a little bit, which is important. And the tongue can rest on the roof of the mouth behind the upper teeth. And then the mental technique, the balance there is between being too rigid, too focused on the technique, and being too lazy about it. So another kind of balance. And the technique, of course, in shamatha, as we're practicing it now, would be to place the attention on the breath. There's many supports for meditation that one can use. We generally start with the breath because it's there, it's natural. It's easy to regulate, or I'm sorry, not regulate, but it's easy to follow this natural process in our body. So you can pay attention to the air coming in and out of the nose, or feel the breath coming all the way in and out again. Whatever works for you, you just place the attention there. And then that'll work maybe for a couple seconds. And then at some point, we notice the attention wanders. And once we notice that, we just gently come back to the breath. And begin anew. And it's really important to remember that those points where we become distracted are not a failure in the practice. That's part of what we're doing. So you're going to, the attention is going to be on the breath, then your attention is going to wander. And when that happens, we just notice that, we can label it thinking, and then bring the attention back to the breath. And that's a good thing. And that's, again, like I said earlier, that's a courageous thing. So, and that is the beginning of all these great qualities. It's the basis of all the great qualities, really. So it's nothing to feel at all defeated about, distractions in your meditation. So let's do a short session, short 4 or 5 minutes probably. And we'll talk a little more, and then we'll get to the topic. Thank you, everybody. So I forgot to mention before we started the importance of making a little aspiration to benefit beings with our practice. So um, I rejoice in all of our efforts. We've just finished, so it's another good time to make an aspiration that what we just did benefits beings. Um, and it always bears mentioning how unique and wonderful this is that we're even here, like doing this kind of a thing, you know. I remember the first time I came to the center and just being, and I went to a Dharma talk. I didn't go to an intro class. I probably should have, but I went to one of Lama Kathy's Dharma talks, and it was just amazing to me that people, there was a room full of people sitting around talking about how we think and how we, treat each other. And it was really amazing. I have a little bit of a Christian background from high school. My family isn't particularly religious, but I went in high school, and there was a lot of talking about scriptures and stuff like that. But I personally felt like there was not a lot of real where the rubber hits the road guidance on just living life. So it was really amazing to me to see that. So and still it's amazing to me, to even be involved in something like this. So thank you all for being here and making aspirations to benefit beings. The topic tonight is equanimity, and we'll sit one more time before I get into some detail. But I wanted to mention, just in terms of the nuts and bolts of like, for instance, shamatha, um, like equanimity. One of the ways we can think about it is in the content or the intensity of the thoughts that arise during our practice. For instance, it doesn't really matter what the content of whatever thought happens to carry you away is. Um, and it doesn't matter if it's good, it doesn't matter if it's bad. Sometimes it could be disturbing, sometimes it could surprise you. Um, these things will happen. And a lot of times I think they're a function of just boredom. Like we're not, our mind wants to be um, engaged in something, doing something, and flitting from one thing to the next, and that keeps it busy, and that keeps us from the familiarity with the mind that we're trying to cultivate through these practices. So a lot of times those thoughts, and one of the reasons it's important to treat them all with equanimity, is because sometimes they're literally just a shiny thing that your mind is kind of waving in front of your face to try to get you from doing what you set out to do. But otherwise, they are all just thoughts. So, and similarly, however our practice goes, whether we have a practice where it's a really we are mostly focused on the breath, fewer distractions, or we have practices where it just seems like it's another distraction after another, and it just keeps coming. And these vary day after day, but we need to look at all of those sessions, regardless of how they went, like that, with equanimity, because we did the practice. Like, and that's the thing. The mind will change from day to day. Things are impermanent. We're always experiencing different things, and different karma is coming to fruition at any given time. So it's not about how many distractions. It's more about just doing the practice, and that's why people have said the best practice is the one you do. So it's all equal. So let's do another short sit. Does anybody have any questions before we do another sit? All right, let's do another 4 minutes, and we'll talk a little bit about equanimity. Making an aspiration that our practice today will bring about Buddhahood for ourselves, so that we can bring all beings to a state of enlightenment and end the suffering of all beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings never be separated from the great happiness that is free from all suffering. May all beings experience the state of equanimity, which is free from aversion and attachment. That's the aspiration prayer of the Four Immeasurables, as it is translated in Rinpoche's Excellent at the Beginning book, Carter Rinpoche, founder of our center and our home monastery, Karma Triana Dharma Chakra. I'm Kathy's teacher, my teacher, an amazing force in Dharma in the West. I'm going to read his introduction to the Four Immeasurables because the next 4 days begins, each session will cover one of these immeasurables. So I'll give a little overview and then we'll focus in on equanimity. So Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche says, this prayer and practice of the Four Immeasurables is really central to Mahayana Buddhism. It is central because it expresses the profound outlook of bodhicitta. He doesn't say this here, but just to insert, bodhicitta, mind of awakening. Chitta is mind, bodhi is to awaken. So Rinpoche says, we do it to develop the vast attitude of benefiting all beings and helping them to reach enlightenment. As we have discussed, each one of us, without exception, has the potential to experience the awakened mind. And each one of us also has habitual obscurations. These habitual obscurations, which are self-created, are the causes of our suffering. Once we understand our potential and our shortcomings, we need to apply skillful means in order to unravel our habits of confusion and unfold our potential. In order for this potential to bloom, we must have the right attitude and the right motivation. First, it is essential to understand that we can definitely experience enlightened minds. We have everything we need within ourselves, and we need to have firm belief in this fact. Second, we should want to share our understanding of this potential with others so that it can benefit their lives as well. Just as we possess enlightened mind, so do all beings, and our belief in this can help them to realize their potential. Being motivated by a genuine interest in benefiting us and others is an important ground for our study of the Mahayana Dharma. When we say the Four Immeasurables, what is really meant by immeasurable, and what are the four? The term for immeasurable in Tibetan is seme. Se means measure, extent, or limit, and me means not or without. So together, the term means immeasurable and limitless. The four things that are immeasurable are loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. These qualities are considered immeasurable because in the outlook of bodhicitta, we extend them to all sentient beings, and sentient beings are limitless in number. Extending compassion, for example, to immeasurable beings creates an immeasurable amount of compassion. This is what is meant by the Four Immeasurables. So, as he mentioned, the four are loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And love or loving kindness in this context, in the Buddhist context, means the wish for others to be happy, for all beings to be happy. Compassion is the wish for all beings to be without suffering. Joy is the wish for beings to never be separate from perfect happiness, happiness where there is no suffering, ultimate happiness. And equanimity is our topic today. So when we say the aspiration, for instance, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness, when we say may they have happiness, we're saying right now may all beings have happiness. And then the second part, the causes of happiness, relates to the future. Ultimately, may they always experience happiness. And it's important to note this because I think we may not be experiencing a happy situation in the moment where we have a chance to create future happiness, the causes of happiness. And in fact, it doesn't really even matter how vile or inappropriate or unjustified whatever that's happening to us is. We still have a chance to create the causes of future happiness from that. And so when we say, may all beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering, it's a similar thing. Like we're saying right now, may they not suffer, and may they also create none of the causes of suffering. And as the Buddha taught in the Four Noble Truths, suffering is a part of life. It has a cause, and that cause is attachment, clinging, grasping. And since it has a cause, if we remove that cause, it is possible to achieve the cessation of suffering. And there's a path to achieve that. So when we say, may all beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering, we're really kind of saying, like, may they not experience any attachment or act upon any attachment, because that would be the causes of future suffering. And then we talked about why they're immeasurable. And I think it's also important to think about like why is it possible that there could be, like, how can we know that we can have immeasurable love? And there is evidence for why that could be. And we could think of it from the other side, which is like for instance, we could take an example of any sort of negative emotion. Greed is an easy one to think of because we know that people may get things and they think, if I get this thing, it'll make me happy. And they get that thing and it maybe works for a day or two, and then they want something else, and there's extremely rich and powerful people whose greed is never sated. I think that's the word. Like, they never get enough. There's immeasurable greed. So because we know there's immeasurable greed, there has to be its opposite. And so there can be immeasurable negative things. It has to be possible that their opposite is true, relatively speaking, too. So so we know that these things can happen, and that, like Rinpoche said, we all have what we need already with us and inside of us. We need to cultivate it, but it's not the case that there's anything outside of us that we need to get. We have it already. And the recitation of the Four Immeasurables is something, and thinking about it is something we can do anytime. Often we see it in practices as a companion with refuge. We do refuge prayer, and then a lot of times that's followed by a recitation of the Four Immeasurables, because that's a way of generating bodhicitta, like generating this attitude, this supreme attitude of wanting to bring all beings to a state of Buddhahood. We're not doing these practices just for ourselves. We're trying to help all beings to realize their potential. So it's also good, just in life, to think about this as we make our way through the world. So it's one of the things that if you haven't memorized the Four Immeasurables, it's a good thing to memorize and just be able to recite for yourself too. I want to read briefly from another document. This is Ken Holmes, who is at Kagi Sami Ling in Scotland. His description of impartiality, because when we say the prayer, we say love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, or impartiality is another word for that. But in practice, well, I'll let Ken say it. He says, in the practical development of these four qualities, training in impartiality has to come first, since it is a defining quality of the other three. Love, for instance, is not only something that should stretch out to an infinity of beings, but it should also be the same in quality for each of those beings. The love and compassion of most people who come to the Dharma is very partial. It is so easy for them to love some people yet hard to feel love for others. It is easy to feel compassion for victims, but not for their victimizers. It is easy to feel joy for some people's success, but difficult when it comes to that of competitors, colleagues, or siblings. It is hard to care for enemies. Partiality should not be confused with indifference. It is not an amputation of feeling and sensitivity so that one becomes a Dharma robot, treating someone mechanically in the same way. In the same way, Maitreya's Ornament of Mahayana Sutras says, a bodhisattva acts towards sentient beings as though they were an only child, with a loving kindness so great that it comes from the very marrow of the bones. Therefore, impartiality is not a downgrading to indifference, but an elevation of each and every sentient being to a position of importance, of friend, of long-lost companion, and of being of equal value as oneself. There are many ways of aiding this change of mentality, such as special Vajrayana ways of seeing every being as the Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, or as one's own teacher. Impartiality or equanimity are the two meanings of the same Sanskrit term. Upeksha, I hope is correct. This helps give some insight in what we are trying to move towards when developing impartiality. It is a state of universal loving care that totally transcends personal likes and dislikes. Such a mind has true equanimity because it remains constant, no matter who is there or what the circumstances are. This is very different from artificial equanimity brought on by meditation performed under tightly controlled circumstances. In ordinary life, some people are naturally attractive for us, as are some places and situations. Other people and circumstances we would rather avoid. Such reactions seem to define us. They are part of the complex shifting sands we call self. Separation from those we love causes tears, as does encountering situations we don't like. Joy and hope are focused on being with those we love and creating ideal circumstances around us. The hope of the Bodhisattva, however, is not focused on externals, but on mind itself. A hope to be able to have inner joy and impartiality, whatever happens and wherever we are. Taisitupa said, to be just as happy if you are a prince one day and a beggar the next. So again, the cause of our suffering is attachment and aversion. And another formulation of this line of the four immeasurables is, may we be free of attachment and aversion to those near and far. And so, as we said, this attachment is what we're trying to undo with all of our Dharma practice. So an egoistic clinging to the self is the source of all attachment and aversion. Without egoistic clinging, there's no attachment or aversion for people. There's no people near to us or people far from us. So again, just working on, lessening our attachment in any way we can is helpful towards meeting these goals. Another formulation of that line that Khepa Rinpoche once used in a teaching on White Tara, that it may be even more applicable today. He said, may all beings become free of the perception of some beings as friends and others as enemies. May they become free from all attachment and aversion and all partiality and prejudice. And one way we can think about this, the ground for this, is we know that all beings equally share this wish to be happy. The same wish that we have, and the same wish that frequently causes us to create the causes of suffering. When we seek happiness in ways that are based upon or reinforce self-clinging, the two actually kind of go together, because when, usually it's motivated by self-clinging, and then in the course of taking an action based on self-clinging, we're also, reinforcing and creating more momentum towards that self-clinging. which is another way of looking at karma too. That like it's the habit energy. We're creating these things become easier to do, and so so a lot of times in these situations when we're trying to be happy, because we're finding ourselves in a situation where we're unhappy, ironically or tragically, we are also creating the seeds of future suffering. We're making a big mistake, you know. And in one way, you can kind of say that's what samsara is. It's just a big mistake. We're making again and again and again, you know. So in any given moment, we're experiencing the fruition of previous karma, and that can be unpleasant. But if we really want to not repeat that suffering, to repeat the cycle, we have to react to our circumstances in a way that isn't based upon attachment and aversion. We have to react with equanimity, love, compassion, and joy, wishing for the benefits of others while reducing our fixation on ourselves. So in any moment, no matter what's happening to us, no matter how uncomfortable, like I said, or like no matter how terrible something is, we still have the chance to react in a way that isn't based on self-cherishing. And that is the cause of future happiness. Usually we do react with self-cherishing. And when we do so, the wheel of samsara spins again. We just it's like spinning one of those old merry-go-rounds at the playground. We hate suffering, so we try to avoid it, and then we create more suffering. It's not wise, but it's why we're all here circling in samsara, all of us. So everybody we encounter, they all want happiness just like we do. We may not have the same brand of searching for that happiness. It may not look the same as ours is, and we may want to have a tendency to want to judge the way others are looking for happiness. But no matter how wonderful we think we are as individuals, if we're acting with self-cherishing, we're creating more of our own suffering. And again, that's a tragic situation, and so we need to see that this is a situation not only for ourselves, but for others, and be aware of this cycle in ourselves and recognize it in others too. And it's an unfortunate cycle. It's everybody wanting something and doing the opposite, the thing that's not going to create that thing they want. That was a tortured sentence, but the idea is, like we all want a thing and we're going about it incorrectly. And so that's a really important thing to remember when we see people that we think are evil or selfish or mean. It's not to say that what they're doing is okay, but we don't have to, we shouldn't, try to judge them or look upon them as less than us. This is just off the top of my head, it just occurred to me too. Another thing to be careful of in these situations, if we're trying to cultivate equanimity, is anytime we have sort of any thought about wanting to, judge something someone else has done, there's really no way of doing that without putting ourselves above them. There's really no way of like saying, I don't like the way he's doing that. It's fine if he wants to do that. I know he's a really smart person, but I don't think that's the right way to do it or whatever. The equanimity's off there, so we have to be really careful about judging people really about anything, that doesn't mean, again, that we need to endorse or allow behavior that harms people. Like, obviously we want to try to benefit beings, but we need to understand that each individual wants happiness. And even if the things they're doing seem to be on a whole different scale of negativity or destruction or whatever compared to the things that we do in our daily life, it's the same fundamental mistake they're making, And so that's how we can find a way to try to generate compassion for all beings. And this idea of equanimity, I think the undercurrent of all this, like we see today in all the protests for racial justice and things like that, we see inequalities. But we, in this tradition, we understand from the Buddhist perspective that this equality stems from this equal wish to be happy that we all have. So we recently had this dialogue at KTC, this social justice dialogue, which is really wonderful, and it's just beginning. And it's important. One of the things we talked about was inherent bias. Realizing the ways that we have power or privilege that we didn't necessarily think about, or we may not even normally notice because we sort of ride upon our privilege, and things just are very easy for us in areas where we have privilege. But interestingly, we all also probably fall into some non-dominant category somewhere, whether it's related to age or nationality or something that isn't the accepted dominant category in culture. So looking for these biases, examining ourselves for these biases in any given moment, and as we move through life in our day, is on one hand a social justice action, but it's also just a very basic Buddhist action. It's something we can do to unravel our attachment and our clinging, and to achieve and understand equanimity in a way that can open up and make most effective and make perfect the other three, love and compassion and joy. And actually, I want to read Trala Rinpoche's definition of equanimity, because I think it speaks to that. He says, equanimity is the most important because without equanimity, loving kindness can become attachment. Compassion can turn into sentimentality, and sympathetic joy can turn into elation. But if we have a proper sense of equanimity, it is possible to keep things in perspective so that our own biases, expectations, and fears did not come in the way of our ability to express these positive emotions. Even with equanimity, however, we must apply mindfulness, because equanimity may turn into indifference, which is actually its opposite. With a sense of equanimity, we are able to do things for ourselves and others, and we can maintain a broader vision. Whereas when we are indifferent, we have no interest whatsoever. So the last point I want to make about this is I believe this, I took this from Rinpoche's book. If not, I paraphrased it. It says, genuine realization of these immeasurables is total, and it needs to be cultivated. Along the way, we do our best to regulate our actions of body, speech, and mind. Do our best. I'm going to repeat that. We do our best to regulate our actions of body, speech, and mind. He goes on to say, while we are in the process of training our minds. So that sentence is, along the way, we do our best to regulate our actions of body, speech, and mind while we are in the process of training our minds. Do your best with respect to your intentions and actions. And I think that again, in terms of having equanimity with ourselves and our own practice, that's important to remember, because we will have a much better chance of regulating our body and our speech in situations that are challenging than our mind, but we're working on it, and that's the most important thing. So I like that advice. And that is also a good thing to think about in terms of people that we meet on the path, on some kind of spiritual path, but also just other people in life. Because even if you're not on some kind of spiritual path, you're consciously trying to cultivate these qualities. Even if that's not the case, most people don't want to be thought of as bad people or angry people, or, so in some way we're all doing our best to regulate our body, speech, and mind, our body and speech, but we all have a harder time, with the mind aspect. So the reason I bring this up is that I know I found myself in situations on either side of this example where, maybe for instance, I react a little, I'm tired or I'm annoyed, somebody asks me something, and maybe I react in a way I shouldn't, like maybe I just express it being a little cold or too directly, or, it just, maybe it comes off the wrong way. And maybe I don't want to admit that. Maybe somebody says, like, hey, are you trying to be mean? Are you mad at me? In that moment, I might say, no, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't mean it that way. Maybe in the second I said it, I really did mean it that way, but I'm doing my best and I don't want the other person to feel bad. And I think this is something that a lot of people do, where you may act a certain way and you realize, oh, you know what, I probably shouldn't have done that. So you say, I didn't mean that, in the moment you may have, but the reason I bring this up is because, again, it's worth another way that we can have equanimity in looking at ourselves and others is that we're all trying our best. We're really trying our best. So it's worth giving people the benefit of the doubt. If something happens and they say, I didn't mean it that way or whatever, and you think they did mean it that way, just let it go. Like we're doing our best. We're all doing our best. And so I think that's kind of indicative of Rinpoche's instruction here about along the way, we do our best to regulate our actions of body and speech while we're in the process of training our minds. So almost out of time. That's surprising. So does anyone have any questions or thoughts?
So I have something. I was thinking about equanimity. It's not that things are equal. It's just that your perception, because maybe somebody's better at playing the saxophone than you are, but it's my reaction to the extreme. Is that more what we're talking about?
I think that's on point. I think that's on point because I think relatively, that we see things that are taller than other things and smaller than other things, or better or worse. But the idea is we from our perspective, we're acting equally with love and compassion towards all of those things and people. Does that make sense? Cool. Anyone else? And Ellen said another little thought about that was I'll have to check this one because I always get tripped up when I try to remember how to say this. But like one of the things, this is in Jewel Ornament, so we'll get to this in the Sunday talks at some point. But like one of the things that about enlightened beings is they have this ability to see the ultimate truth. You know what I mean? They see limitlessness and non-duality, but simultaneously they see the multitude of things. So they see beings and they see what they're doing and they see people who are better at things and people who are worse at things. But at the same time, they have this ability to see ultimate truth as well. And we could even maybe talk about how there's some equanimity there. I think I've mentioned before too. Somebody in retreat gave me great advice about not clinging too much to ultimate truth or not clinging too much to relative truth. And how each of those can be problematic. Boone.
Yeah, I have a silly question. Maybe it's a little too silly to ask this question.
No silly questions.
I teach in a college, and so one of my job is to give grades to my students. And while I love my students, I like to be just teaching them and not give them any grades. But at the end of the semester, I say, okay, you actually are an A and you get a C and you deserve to fail. Yeah. So how can I practice my Dharma while I'm having this job and try not to be too judgmental, but I am judgmental.
Yeah. Well, I think I have to guess that there's some objective metric by which you're grading your students. So, and we do need, in relative reality, we do need some of these things, and in fact, we can't even attain enlightenment without working with our relative situation, so I think that's a good question, and I'm going to think about it even for days afterwards because it's a great question. But I would say that I think your main thing for your practice is to make sure that regardless of what their grade is, you see their worth. You see their Buddha nature. You see that that even if they didn't study on purpose, like they voluntarily didn't do their work, they probably thought whatever they were doing was going to make them happy. Whatever things they were doing when they could have been doing their work, they thought that was going to give them happiness, and it may have for a moment, but we know it's, number one, it's not going to get them their degree, and it's probably not going to help them, through their life, create the kind of situations that would bring them happiness. So I think and then on the flip side, the person who got the A is not some kind of superstar, that deserves all kinds of extra kudos just because they did, the work that needs to be done. There's an equal, those students have equal worth and equal Buddha nature, and sometimes you just have to, you have to give someone an F and someone has to get an A, but I think you can be equally kind and supportive to all those people, Is that helpful? Good. Thank you. That's a good question. I'm going to think about that because I feel like there's more to that answer that I'm not getting. But we're right at the end, but we should end with one more session of sitting. So if anyone needs to go, that's fine. But let's do another 4 minutes, and then we'll call it a night. Let's silently dedicate the merit for the benefit of all beings. Thank you, everybody. It's great to see you all. Thank you, Tanya, for hosting. Thank you, Lama Kathy,
Thank you.
watching
Thank
the
you.
gates.
Yay.
Uh,
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. See
Thank you.
tomorrow night.
Lisa.
Tomorrow night is loving kindness.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll see you then.
Have a great
Take care,
night.
everybody.
Omane Peme Hum.
Thanks, Lama.
Bye.
That was really helpful.